Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony today. And Director Burns, thank you so much for your effort on achieving a peace agreement with return of the hostages and a ceasefire. Thank you to the President for calling for a ceasefire and the administration. I want to ask you about part of your testimony yesterday in the Senate in regards to Gaza and the situation there. Yesterday at the Senate Select Committee's hearing, you said regarding Gaza that, quote, the reality is that there are children who are starving and that, quote, they're malnourished as a result of the fact that humanitarian assistance can't get to them. Can you speak to what impediments there are to humanitarian assistance getting to civilians in Gaza and who is responsible?
I think the challenge is a very real one, and I think it's just a fact that, children face incredibly difficult circumstances, in fact, desperate circumstances, especially in North Gaza. It's partly a function of humanitarian assistance just not getting there in the quantities that are required. It's partly a function of it not being distributed in conditions in which, conflict is still going on, and that's why, as I tried to emphasize yesterday, I think it's so important that we continue to work with our partners in Israel and Qatar and Egypt to try to produce a deal, an agreement, which would involve not only the release of a significant number of hostages and ultimately all of the hostages, because they're in desperate circumstances and so are their families, but it would also provide for an exchange with a defined number of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. It would allow for at least a 6-week ceasefire. And as a step toward more enduring arrangements. And I think in terms of humanitarian assistance, it would allow practically not only for a very significant surge in humanitarian assistance coming in, but under the conditions of a ceasefire, you could actually distribute it effectively.
So but let me ask you, Director, and I appreciate all of that work. I think it's incredibly important to end the dire situation there. But you are intimately familiar with what's going on the ground. You were in the middle of negotiations. You're a longtime diplomat and a skilled negotiator. And on top of all of this, who is responsible for keeping that humanitarian assistance from getting to the starving children of Gaza?
I think anybody who has an interest, and I think all of us feel this deeply, to produce the kind of humanitarian assistance that's so obviously required has an interest in trying to get this deal done. I think, as the President has made clear, Israel has the right to defend itself, especially after the brutish attack that Hamas.
Sure, and nobody disagrees with that.
Right, but at the same time, as the President has made clear, Israel has an obligation to try to protect civilians, particularly innocent women and children.
Hamas, I have to get to one more issue after this.
Can I just add one thing, though?
Sure, of course.
Congressman, Hamas also bears responsibility for this as well, and if Hamas is interested in the fate of women and children and innocent civilians in Gaza, it will also work hard to try to produce this kind of an agreement.
But you agree that even in wartime, there are obligations by all sides that humanitarian assistance reaches civilians. Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And U.S. law and the Humanitarian Aid Corridor Act prohibits foreign assistance to countries, quote, when it is made known to the President that the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts, directly or indirectly, the transport or delivery of the United States humanitarian assistance. So let me ask you a quick follow-up. As the President's principal advisors on the matters of intelligence, has the President been made aware of the government Israel directly or indirectly prohibiting or otherwise restricting U.S. humanitarian assistance to Gaza?
I think, and Director Haynes can speak to this too, but of course we provide, every bit of intelligence that we have about that issue and everything else.
And like I said, I have one more question on an important declassification question, but has the President been made aware of this? Matt Miller had made a very clear comment that Israel did have some role, at least, in blocking that assistance. Does the President know that?
I think the President's made clear that Israel can and should do more in terms of ensuring that humanitarian assistance gets in.
Okay, thank you all. Directors Wray and Director Burns, in recent decades, the United States intelligence community has worked to reform practices that led to the illegal disruption and infiltration of peaceful civil rights movements, particularly in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I'm sure you're aware of some of the most egregious examples of this behavior, including FBI's COINTELPRO operation against the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and CIA's Operation Chaos. Yesterday, I sent a letter asking your agencies to declassify and release, to the greatest extent possible, materials related to surveillance of the Latino civil rights movement, if any exist in your holdings. And I want to ask you whether you'll commit to working with me to improve the historical record and ensure that U.S. intelligence agencies can correct the mistakes of the past with regard to surveillance of Latino civil rights organizations.
Yes.
We'll review your letter and see what we can provide.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Ms. Stefanik.